Good morning, everyone. I'm Kat Frame, Chair of the CRIG Seminar Committee. Thank you for joining us today for the final CRIG seminar event. Firstly, I ask that you all mute yourselves and turn off your cameras if you haven't already. On behalf of CAVAL and the CRIG Seminar Committee, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands across Australia and New Zealand where we live, learn and work. I'm on Wurundjeri land. If you know the land you're on today, feel free to put it in the chat. We acknowledge and celebrate the inherent strengths of Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and other First Nations people and communities and recognise their continuing connection to land, water, sky and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. This morning we have three 15-minute presentations lined up, followed by a facilitated discussion. If you have questions for the speakers throughout the session, please ask them through the Slido link, which we've added to chat and the presentation. Alternatively, you can also go to slido.com or the Slido app and use the event code #69864. Before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to thank the CRIG Seminar Committee members, Romney Adams, Kat Kane, Linda Forbes, Joe Gillespie, Sarah Beltrame, and Sarah Davidson from CAVAL for their hard work in putting this seminar series together. It could not have been done without you. Our first speaker today is Jane Cowell. Jane is the CEO of Yarra Plenty Regional Library. Our second presenter is Adele Walsh, Senior Coordinator, Community Outreach and Engagement at Trobe University Library. Our final presenter is Jessamyn West, a librarian and community technologist who lives in central Vermont in the US. Our facilitator for today is Damian Lodge. Damian is Dean Academic at Massey University in New Zealand. So let's get started. Thanks, Jane. I'll hand over to you now.
Thanks, Kat. We do the awkward thing of sharing screens now and making sure that it works. And here we are. So I come to you from Wurundjeri land too, Kat. So we're obviously fairly close. You can connect with me on Twitter. I write a blog on Medium under Jane Cowell, and also on LinkedIn. I always connect with librarians, as I love to hear what you're doing, as well as sharing what we're doing here at YPRL. In terms of libraries, sort of in COVID and being really creative, innovative and agile in their response to a very difficult situation, and it has been across the world, libraries have been really quick to change, to adapt and to deliver services in really different ways. So one of the key things that we do to connect with people, and we really missed our audiences, was around putting our digital story times online. So, sort of all of our story times went online. Our Australian Library and Information Association helped with that by gaining the copyright clearance from publishers that we could do that as long as we took the videos down. At YPRL, our story times had over 200,000 hours of viewing, which is fantastic over that time. We put up 3 a day, making sure that we had a baby, a toddler and a rhyme time. So these were things that libraries did across Victoria as well as across Australia. Some libraries loaned out digitally connected devices very quickly before they were completely shut down, so that people still had access in their homes. Because one of the key things in lockdown that really came clear was the digital divide. Those that did not have internet to the home were really cut off from everything that was happening. So that was a really important aspect for some libraries who were able to do that. Click and collect, curbside pickup, deliveries all happened for our physical items that went out, sort of to our members. And particularly for those states in Australia where the libraries were still able to be work sites. Here at YPRL, in Metro Melbourne, in the first lockdown, our branches were not able to be work sites. So we had to transition all of our staff to work from home. So those key things, sort of that happened once we really settled were really key audience drivers. So we focused on kids, as you can see from, sort of this slide. We created a kids corner on our website. We put our Lego clubs, our science clubs all online, all regularly streaming live from Facebook Live. And we really were looking to make that connection with children who were in lockdown, who were looking for things to do. All of the activities were things that you could do with things from your kitchen cupboard, from things that you had at home. No, go the other way. So some of the other programs that we put together, particularly when schools were closed as well, was our pet tales. So we used to have, we have guinea pigs at our libraries, and we had doggy tales with dogs coming to the library. So for reluctant readers, now these were booked out. These were one-on-one, so there were 15-minute practice reading sessions to a pet. We had a lizard. We did have the guinea pigs. Sort of a lovely dog and a bird. So there were lots of pets, but they were booked out, which was fantastic. Our science club was really well attended. And, the children were really engaged, sort of over that time. We also created new clubs like the YPRL Culture Club, where we discussed the films from our Canopy resources. I did do a full library programming goes digital during COVID-19 article for Medium. So you can look at all of the things that we sort of put online, but other, libraries did similar activities, particularly around the language clubs, so that people who did have English as a second language still got to practice English in the lockdown. So the problem that we saw was we had to make lockdown bearable. And our solution was curated library resources just for you. So this was library delivered in really different ways. So we created things like the Stay at Home Film Festival, where you could stream from Beamer Film, Canopy, sort of from our services, these films, and we curated it for you. So, sort of there was even No Children Allowed for the horror films after dark. So it was all curated so that you had something to do, remembering that in the lockdown here in Melbourne, you could only leave your home for 1 hour a day. So you really were locked down. The YPRL Family Fun Bundles were curated for families and delivered by the post to your homes. We got photos from families as they opened them. We're so glad that they'd got this box of books and so connected to the library from it, and feeling that we actually knew them because, sort of there was something there. We also always put in a piece of fun, so an activity, something that the kids could do. The click and collect still happened once we were able to be at the work site, and I think many libraries did this. So this was your holds. We had 75,000 holds done in just 3 months. So, there was still a real need for physical books. People were a bit sick of the screen, I think, and really wanting that physical book as something to do. We also delivered care boxes to the vulnerable. So those who were over 70, who were really told that they shouldn't go out at all and have their groceries delivered, we also delivered care boxes and dropped them off to their home. And that was, sort of really curated resources and curated activities. We really, sort of looked at, how we connected with people as well. So while the physical libraries were closed, our digital library was open. So all of our blogs on our website really curated resources around particular interests. We've just, sort of done a whole lot of lost hobbies, sort of the lost arts, of how to make a pen out of a feather. All of those kinds of hobbies we've designed activities for, with video guides, just around, sort of people's interests. And of course, the other thing we did, we really did reach out. So we wanted to keep the connection. We knew that our seniors may not know about our e-library or our digital library. And so we emailed them telling them that we're going to ring and to opt out if they didn't want to call. A few did opt out. And we worked with our team of staff, and they were able to ring over 7,000 of our senior members and connect them to our e-library. A lot of the seniors, their children had bought them a device. Sort of one of the first calls we made was to a 93-year-old who had got a new iPad, and we helped her set up the iPad over the phone and download her first ebook. So you never stop learning. So please don't think that because people are 93 that they can't download an ebook. They can, and they're very proud of themselves when they do that. So that was about keeping the connection. So we focused on our kids, on families, and our seniors. We didn't try and do everything for everyone. So the other key things that we did was we curated selection for you. So we ran a book valet where you told us, you answered 3 questions, and we selected items for you. And we turned that into a podcast called In the Good Books. And so we discussed your selection, and 3 of us would get together and sort of select the books for you. And we always put in a wild card just in case you wanted to expand your reading experience. We had daily Ask a Librarian, which went for sometimes for 6 hours when we were all in lockdown, but reduced to 2 hours. So we just tried to have that conversation happening with our audience. We did do tech help. And the tech help, has been over the phone. And we also crafted a few how-to videos that went on our website. So, sort of a real curated selection of we did the curation for you. So a lot of the feedback we were getting was, yes, sort of you have 400,000 items, but we don't know which ones will suit us, when we're not there. So we really did do that curation, and all library staff got involved in the book valet. So for the future, we're really redeveloping our event planning. These will be smaller in-person events. We will still digitally stream our events. And for an example, our story times will become smaller and more focused on the parents learning the art of telling a story and learning the art of, sort of engaging with the child as their first teacher. So, really skilling up the parent. So there'll be small focus sessions. We will also be looking at building community confidence of coming back. So we now are open. We've noticed that, people are anxious about coming out. So it's really building that community confidence and, sort of feeling safe when they come out. We'll also be really thinking about wellness as a program focus. We're focused totally on recovery. Sort of Metro Melbourne has, has suffered a recession. We've had significant joblessness in our particular 3-member councils. So we'll be really focusing on financial wellness, and that will be, sort of getting your finances in order, sort of how to remortgage your home. We know that these things will be a real issue for people between January and March. We also know that people are feeling very disconnected with their community. They're worried about their children's social lives and ability to socialise. So we'll be really focusing, sort of programs around that and intentionally bringing peoples together and learning how to introduce yourselves, talk, sort of, and be social again. And also the environment. All 3-member councils really want by 2040 to have net zero emissions. So, sort of helping people be more sustainable as well. The other key things for our future is we are back. We've got a new library opening in Ivanhoe, which will be fantastic when it's finished, hopefully in early December. We've got a newly refurbished library, Mill Park Library, which will open and will be the first library that will have gender neutral toilets, which is perfect in COVID-19 times because there will be no shared taps. So we're about to start a new project to refurbish another library at Diamond Valley, and we're launching a new library management system, a new library app, and a new library website on December the 2nd. So we have not been slow or not have work to do over the lockdown. We've been very, very busy. Part of our, we did open an outreach hub, which was a contactless service of click and collect in a little village. And we're going to evaluate how that's working and see whether we can do that in other small villages as well, remembering that people could not go further than 5 kilometres in the lockdown. So we're really thinking about innovative ways of reaching out to our communities, particularly with our physical items, and spreading our physical library as far as we can. So that's us at YPRL, and I'm going to hand over to Adele. Is she here?
She sure is.
Okay, Adele, over to you.
Hi.
Now,
Thank you so much, Jane. That was wonderful. Yarra Plenty has been a strong leader in public libraries in their actions and their staff conduct throughout this period and previously as well. So thank you for sharing all that. You should be very proud of your staff. Okay, so I'm going to get queued up. Oh. This is going to be a bit awkward because I'll be talking about online communities and I can't use any screen caps or live examples of those communities because that would be breaking copyright, and I do not want to disappoint our copyright officer. So you'll be getting some probably stock standard images, and you'll have to be listening hard. But I do want to pay respects. I am speaking today from the Wurundjeri lands, and I'll be talking about story and community, which are both essential parts of that community. So I am the Community Outreach and Engagement Senior Coordinator at Trobe University. I've been in the role for nearly a year. 3 months in, COVID happened. So part of my role was to design an events program, which went on hold, and also rejuvenate the PD program for the internal staff. I'm really happy to say that myself and my colleague Katie have run over 70 sessions in that time online, and we've had nearly 1,700 hours of professional learning amongst the staff. So we've had some big wins, but I'm going to talk about a small part of that. So this is where I started. So this is me a few years ago in my role as the program manager for the Centre for Youth Literature at the State Library Victoria. When I arrived in that position in 2011, the entire program was centred on legacy programming for librarians. The conference, the quarterly sessions, and the newsletter were all directed at their loyal audience, and that loyal audience was no longer so loyal. Numbers were dropping. So in the first few years, we pivoted away from that model and started investing in opportunities to put teenagers in the driver's seat, or as we came to call it, teens to the front, a reference to the Riot Girls rallying cry of the 90s. If we, as an industry, a youth literature industry, the public libraries, the teacher librarians, the publishers, the creators, and the teachers were truly in it to engage young people in literature and reading, we should probably listen to them and have that perspective infiltrate every decision, every program, and every priority that we set. In the time that I worked at CYL, I managed upwards of 9 social media platforms for 2 account personas, one for young people and one for professionals. They have different needs. You couldn't do that all in one group, one brand. Staffing was typically 1.6 EFT, which is not very much with everything else that was happening. But that grew exponentially the whole time I was there. Maggie, don't take my spotlight. It was rare not rare for me personally to answer upwards of 500 professional queries a year through email, phone, social media, etc. As there wasn't much professional steer for teen librarians, and we were the only place to go. But in all that work, there wasn't an online PD community. Accidentally, I created that around myself and my brand, though I didn't talk about myself that way or even think I had a brand. I think my brand was strongly opinionated and YA. I read a lot about teenagers, YA young adult releases, teen psychology, academic research, what's hot on Netflix, the younger set, even lurked on Tumblr to see what pop culture was beginning to emerge. Even better, I worked really hard on trying to understand the language of every generation because it changes. So people don't say rad anymore, or do they? I discussed this all on Twitter, and on the occasional time I was asked to present, but there wasn't a proper funnel for all this knowledge. Oh my gosh. So this is where you don't see Facebook. So to backtrack a little, I've been on Twitter since 2008. I actually owned the @Adele handle for a hot minute before I decided that was too obnoxious to have, and settled on the equally obnoxious @SnarkyWench, referencing my previous young adult blogging life. Twitter was a place I did whatever I wanted, except swear. And my approach to Twitter hasn't really changed all that much. Unfiltered Adele on equality, industry, pop culture, and Maggie. In the midst of, so Twitter is for me, is what I'm trying to say. If it has professional wins associated with it, that's actually pretty accidental. In mid-2018, I decided I was going to start a monthly newsletter to aggregate all the amazing resources that I came across in my fun extra reading, and to fill that professional support gap that I recognized wasn't there, that was gaping actually. What I do for myself for fun suddenly felt selfish to keep to myself. So I immediately had 500 people sign up thanks to Twitter. And almost as immediately, I realized that the newsletter format didn't meet our collective needs. And I did it for a few months trying to make it work in that format before I recognized it wasn't working and to move on. And if I have a big regret, it's that I didn't do that earlier. You know when something's not working, it means you have to do something different. At the end of 2018, I pivoted to Facebook. I know I don't love it either, but it works. And I've been steadily growing since then. We're close to 500 at the moment, but that's not really the point. The point is to create a safe, progressive space for youth literature professionals who wanted to be proactive in their professional practice and growth. And I want it to be a practical place, and I will always emphasize practical, place that focused on things to read, ideas to try, and how to respect teens. Professionals who work with kids don't have much time. They want to read something quickly, apply it, assess if it works for them, and then move the heck on. And I wanted to help make their lives easy. I wanted to actually reduce some stress. And I didn't want it to be just library focused or school focused or author self-promotion focused, but everything related to the audience, not the profession. Not our job titles or the industries we worked within, but the community we collectively served and didn't work actually together to bring all that there. And I also wanted to make sure that it had an international perspective. And I don't mean just the US. I mean, we're looking further than our own backyard. And if we are looking at our backyard, we're thinking inclusively. And it has been that. The NAC was formed to try new ideas and, more importantly, be open to new ideas and mess around in uncomfortable truths that we find difficult to discuss. Libraries tend to have a very monocultural, straight middle class population, and it's time for us to do some work on ourselves. So there's some things I learned straight away. Do I know what my audience needs, or do I just have a feeling of what my audience needs? Keep the copy short, and sometimes you don't need it because the link does the work for you. Remove the HTML as soon as it appears in the preview box. People don't know that this can happen. When the preview pops up, take the HTML out. Create white space in the post, make it accessible and make it inviting, not cluttered. Ask an open question, invite thoughts. And if you want to contribute to the conversation as the person running the community, write it as a response to the initial post. It puts me on level playing ground with my playing field with the community, as opposed to stating it up front and setting the agenda. And if you're not getting comments, and it happens, consider the need that you are meeting, or your copy. A lot of times it's your copy, or both. And why would this be important to someone? And recognize that you are already converted. So what works for you is not going to work for everybody else. And the last one is analytics don't lie. So the hottest time on the NAC, and this is shocking to me because this has changed in the last few months, is Friday at 8 p.m. So I reference those analytics and schedule to those times. During the Black Lives Matter protests of this year, I saw a big spike in engagement in our community, and I was meeting that need. I was posting resources 3 times a day instead of daily, typically, sadly, from the US, because Australia wasn't producing resources or training. I would find Australian-related content or transferable content if I could. And I wanted to volunteer that the work could be done and where we could start as a community, and happily do that. So I wasn't creating extra labor for people who are already strongly affected by this injustice. Our job is to learn ourselves. We work in learning institutions, we can be driving that ourselves. So we've built enough trust in the community that people were volunteering what they found useful, what they had learned, and how they'd grown. So this went on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it was fantastic. I did ask members a few months ago about what they found most useful. I had a goal, but what were they getting out of it? These are 3 comments. 1, you post a lot of content that's just out. So I learn things through here quicker than I would have found on my own. It helps me think beyond my own personal relationship with young youth literature and how programs work in the library setting, i.e. actually catering for the target audience. The breadth of information shared and conversation starters that go beyond YA Lit and focus on teens as an audience and as a demographic worthy of professional consideration and effort. And I wanted to make sure I stay abreast of what's going on with YA Lit so I can keep putting great things in front of my students. These are all lovely things. They were not necessarily the goal, but they were the impact. So what I learned from the NAC actually really directly impacted my work for on Yammer, which also I can't show because of the platform. So we redesigned the PD program at La Trobe this year. I talked about some of the numbers at the beginning. Katie is my officer and is fantastic, and I couldn't do anything without her. So it is a we will not be using I. Katie and I conceptualized what a learning community might look like practically speaking, and we wanted to foster the continuance of conversation after the PD sessions had concluded to and ensure staff who couldn't attend live because of rostering, etc., could watch on demand and still be part of the conversation afterwards. There was a pre-existing social professional reading YA group for library staff prior to my team's creation, and we worked with Claire O'Hanlon to sort of explore what opportunities we could have in growing that online community. In February, we recognised its importance in our larger professional development program and how it could be a place to share experiences, ask questions and make recommendations. It's kind of very similar to what I've been doing on the NAC. We were already working towards this when COVID happened. And so we stepped up our plan to encompass way more well-being as well. With our staff flung to every corner of the state, we wanted to ensure that there was a content plan, particularly in the early days, to foster connection and some frivolity. When you think about an online community, people talk about it occurring organically or unstructured, and that can happen, but you do need a structure, particularly a content plan initially to test what members respond to and change it up accordingly. We found out that pet photos and recipes worked at the beginning, like probably everybody, and then people moved on, and it hasn't been the case for quite a few months. Community needs and energy ebb and flow. You need to read the room and change with it. If people are flat, putting lots of content on Yammer is really overwhelming and an additional stress. So we actually have pared back quite a lot in the last 2 months. Immediately following every PD session, we would send an email out with the recording link, slides, survey link, and then a link to Yammer. In following this link, staff would see a post by the presenter that asks attendees to discuss topics related to this, to their lives. It's relaxed, and more important, it's voluntary. And while it doesn't always work, it sometimes helps to consolidate the learning, leverage collective wisdoms, and recognize and validate expertise amongst our staff. We learnt things about each other, not just about the subject we were focused on. But what happened as a result of that? Active members in that community grew 94% since January. I believe most, if not all, staff are on the group at this point, and reactions to posts have grown nearly 3,000%. I did say that right, 3,000% in that time. What's even better is we don't need to post. My team doesn't need to post anymore, as the community takes care of that, which is actually a sign of success. In the last 48 hours, there's been a call out for funny TV recommendations, a link to pronoun resources, and a report of the Waterfowl University rankings in which the Latrobe Ducks didn't do very well. A PD community isn't just formed around like the morning tea or on Twitter. It can be created in a single post on Yammer over and over and over again. Another thing we're trying in digital programming is a format called work-alongs. We're taking the idea of working alone together, half-an-hour sessions each week on LinkedIn, a segment of your LinkedIn profile, 5 to 10 minute instruction on how to make that area a bit better, and then 20 minutes to draft. And we've actually had nearly 2/3 of the library interested in doing that as well. And we're working on our events program for 2021. We're using co-design and design thinking principles to design that new event series, and we're getting every idea, and every idea is assessed by students, for students. Okay, so the last question I was asked to sort of delve into was what we can learn from public libraries. I worked at State Library for nearly 10 years and worked with a lot of different public libraries. The Creative State strategy released a few years ago here in Victoria really didn't have libraries on the radar. I think that is a reflection, and this is generalization, so feel free to hate me on doing that. Librarians typically are not great advocates for themselves or the industry. Like scratch that, we're pretty terrible at it. Public Libraries Victoria launched the Libraries Change Lives campaign nearly, I think, 3 years ago. We were able to build on the momentum of that work with important council and state government advocacy this year. And while it would have been easy to dismiss this on face level as a promotional win, their network underwent considerable training in storytelling and the tools to capture the anecdotal successes and community impact. University libraries could really learn from this. Regardless of which uni we're affiliated with, we are all in this together. And what would a community look like with a common goal? Do we have a standard hashtag? We might not, I might not know it. To spruik our wins and to celebrate and boost each other's. Another thing we could learn from public libraries is to take the library to them. There's a temptation to make library use about the space, whether physical or digital, but what about taking the service to them? And Jane's talked a lot about this. A few years ago, I heard of Auckland Library, which took items from their collection out to a bar, chatted about what was in that selection, and matched attendees to books that they had so they can borrow them there from the bar. And it was called Read Between the Vines, and it was a solution to the problem that young professionals weren't using the library because they couldn't attend during work hours. They couldn't come in. So they went to that user group and to expand that demographic. So what does it look like if academic libraries would step outside of the campus? What can we upend? And what's the best space to share the successes and failures that we experience? And what can libraries learn in general? Oh, I would love to see more open innovation, sharing our failures openly. I think that's something we can all do. But in tough resourcing and funding times, I understand why it's not. I think the big thing we could all learn is to find the middle ground with marketing teams. In nearly every library environment I've worked within or heard about, there is tension. I've even heard it dismissed as style over substance. Why can't it be both? Library copy can be quite dry and tends to remove a voice. Libraries understand their audience and their needs, but not necessarily how to write good copy for that audience. Marketing people know how to write to an audience and the tools to get them. I suggest we need to work harder to respect each other's expertise and create better content together. Seriousness doesn't necessarily mean respect, and respect doesn't mean engagement, unfortunately. We need to be warm, approachable, and consistent with our content creation. And this is only going to be harder as we all have resourcing issues. The last thing I want to say is there's that quote from the Kevin Costner movie, Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. No, design it together and they'll bring a friend. And we cannot assume that we are a proxy for our users or our audience. We need to ask great questions and be prepared for challenging responses. And this will result in larger gains more quickly. And the big word of the day, which we're all sick of, innovation. So thank you very much. I will stop sharing. And I am now going to hand over to Jessamyn.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Adele. Let me share my slides and then I will share my notes. And while I do that, let me put the, there's an accessible version of my slides that's available on the web. So an HTML version, you can kind of read along with me if you want to. And it describes the slides and everything else. So thank you. And hi from Vermont. We are in unceded Abenaki territory. And that is a sort of an interesting and ongoing project. In addition to my library work, I do a lot of work with the Vermont Humanities Council. And part of what we're doing this year, especially last year, is ensuring that we're doing humanities programming for all Vermonters. And that's historically been a little difficult. I know you guys probably have this in your own communities, but there's a sense of sort of who the people are. I mean, even in Australia, you probably know, or New Zealand, Vermont, oh, skiing, cows, Ben & Jerry's, ice cream, etc. And breaking out of that has been a real challenge. And before I get totally started, I just wanted to say I've been positioning myself in your space because I'm reading this amazing book called Floating Gold, A History of Ambergris, which so far takes place on a New Zealand beach. And it's very exciting to think about beaches as we're entering winter here in Vermont. So, hi, thank you for having me. Adele and Jane very much enjoyed what you had to say. So, getting going, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're up to, not just in Vermont, but sort of America in general, as we grapple with all the things we are grappling with, and talking about the digital divide, which is kind of my thing, but how we deal with engagement, especially under COVID, essentially. So first of all, as you probably know, libraries in the United States are very decentralized, which is to say that similar to sort of your Australian states, each state has its own thing. They all have their own state libraries. They all have their own consortia or whatever. And they all handle funding differently, and they all sort of work together or don't work together in different ways. So I'm going to do a lot of kind of hand-wavy generalization stuff, but then talking specifically about Vermont's library. Note, this is not actually Vermont, as you probably know, But where I live, it's one of the smallest states, both in size and in population, but we have the most libraries per capita of any state in the United States. I don't know, we're bookish, winter is long. I'm not sure if I could exactly explain it. And one of the interesting things about our library system in Vermont is that each town, we have 251 towns and 183 libraries, and each library is entirely funded and governed by its own community. We do not have consortia. We do not have funding from the state, as much as we do have a state library who we love and get along with. But we are each one is funded on its own. We go to town meeting every year. We explain why we need more money or a different thing or etc. And so what it does mean is in times of stress and struggle, and in this case, in times of COVID, the response from individual towns has been highly variable. Some libraries never entirely closed, except for our brief period of actual lockdown in sort of March and April. Some libraries actually never entirely opened after we closed in March. And so having places where we could have community conversations as librarians has been one of the most critical parts of having a response that's been sort of respectful and honoring the communities that we have. Because right now in America, we are entering another grim period of sort of winter and maybe increasing restrictions. And libraries are having to make some difficult decisions about how to work with that and their patrons. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of what some of the tricky parts are and how people have been kind of dealing with that. So as COVID initially swept through the US, and for us, this started pretty much the second week of March, we were all forced basically to make some changes. And that was obvious, right? Something's got to change. You have to close your door. What happens? I mean, we were governed to a certain extent by kind of laws and regulations, but to a much larger extent, we were governed by sort of ethical and appropriate ways to interact with our communities. So it wasn't even so much, this is the law. It was more like, well, what's the most useful way to provide services, reach people, etc. And so for us, that started mostly in March, and restrictions started easing up a little bit around May, probably. And some of the most complicated parts of the initial conversations before there were sort of rules that told us what to do, but we realized that something would happen. First thing I always love to talk about, and I think this is one of the one things that isn't on my list of links that should have been, but this concept of vocational awe. The idea that you are essential to people's lives, which, don't get me wrong, like I believe that that is true. On the other hand, in a public health emergency, you need to also be essential to people's staying alive, which can sometimes mean making different choices about how to interact with them, especially in person. And so trying to grapple with that on a personal level, very difficult. Dealing with communities' emotional responses. Vermont is known as being kind of, I think liberal is probably the easiest way to put it, but it's not strictly all like that. I live in a tiny town. Well, it's tiny. It's like 4,000 people. And it was roughly 30% Trump voters, even in 2020, which I find surprising, but it's just true about our community. So for, every 2 people who were totally fine with closing the door, wearing a mask, washing your hands, having these restrictions, we had a third of our community, and not strictly, but a fifth, a third, who were just like, it's made up. I don't need to do that. I'm angry about the fact that I'm being denied access to a public resource that belongs to me, right? Because ultimately, we're stewards of community resources. The library doesn't belong to me, it belongs to the community. And that becomes very challenging when you have to tell certain people no, even though we walk away from the building and lock the door every night and people don't freak out. But when we tell people, oh, you need to come during special browsing hours or wear a mask or do other certain things, dealing with that is its own emotional challenge on top of all of the other things that you need to do. Some places had what I would consider to be leadership vacuums, which is to say they did not get good top-down advice. In Vermont, this was not the case. We have a very strong state library with a brand new, couple of years, state librarian who was willing to get ahead of this problem and make, pronouncements when he could and say the times when he couldn't and explain when people would have to make choices themselves. But he set expectations accurately for what you could expect from leadership, as opposed to, say, my town manager, who just kind of hid out at home and wasn't very public and was not a helpful part of helping our community understand what they needed. And then, of course, the biggest issue is, and somebody's put in a great link to Vocational Awe during the pandemic. Super, super useful article. Lastly, the digital divide, right? We dealt with this in Vermont maybe 5 or 6 years ago when we had a terrible flood that made many towns lose power for long periods of time or lose access to the outside world because the only roads in and out were washed out. And our emergency management agency had a server room in the basement of a government building that was underwater. And so they, instead of taking to their own website and using the tools they knew about, they kind of pivoted and kind of like Adele's group being like, Facebook's available, people are there, we're on Facebook now. And so if you were somebody who was already online, you would have a much easier time grappling with a disaster. And I have to say, I was not happy with that disaster. I did not enjoy it. It was unpleasant, but it got more people in our community online so that when COVID hit, we had fewer people who still had to take that final step, because it's very tricky to get people access. I was on a local team of sort of digital divide mitigation. How do we get the last 15 families in our community access to the internet so the children can go to school when school is closed? And in many cases, it came down to literally, we need to pay a guy to dig a trench so that we can get a cable to their home. It wasn't, it wasn't a money issue. I mean, a little bit. The guy who digs the trench is expensive, but in a general sense, it wasn't a money issue. It wasn't a we don't want it issue. It wasn't any of those issues. It was literally, we got to find a guy who can dig a trench, and when money became available, it was just this logistical thing more than almost anything else, which was the thing that was the most surprising to me. I would have thought it was people who didn't have technology, people who didn't want it, people we couldn't reach. In many cases, it was, let's just figure out how to schedule the guy with the shovel. And you would not have thought that would have been the thing. And there were good parts of it. I talked about money for the shovel guy. IMLS, our Institute of Museum and Library Services, is a nationwide organization that received a lot of money from the federal government, who I don't have a lot of great things to say about for the past several years. But IMLS maintained their funding and was able to make many grants to help smaller communities like mine build out their infrastructure, in many cases, mostly Wi-Fi, ways to go contactless, ways to build out, internet in public housing situations that didn't have them, so people didn't each have to subscribe individually, but there could be library or library and community funded Wi-Fi in situations where it could benefit the most people. Some of this infrastructure was in place already. Most of our libraries, every library we have has Wi-Fi. One of the things our state librarian did was encourage libraries to leave it on at night. And part of that is a hearts and minds thing. It's not, it's a light switch, right? But you have to convince somebody that flipping that light switch is the right thing to do, and having really good leadership with confidence, and I'll get back to that confidence in a second, is sort of part of how that thing goes. The other thing that was really helpful is that we're already hyper local. We know our people, we know our communities, and we're able to figure out things that will work for them. Entering winter, one of the big issues we're dealing with is many of our outside options. Hey, just park outside. We've got picnic tables. We've got this and that. Really aren't going to work when it's very cold outside. And so now we're thinking of other ways to provide access to, especially technology, if people don't have it at home, for them to be able to do this. And so one of the early lessons was many of the libraries that did better weren't always the ones that were best with computer. Like, I'm really good with computer. I pride myself, really good with computer. But sometimes the problems you're having aren't a problem the computer lady can solve. Sometimes the problems you're having involve effectively engaging with your community. And one of the hardest things was, under COVID especially, people want a lot of things they can't have. I want things I can't have. Other people want things they can't have. People ask these things of their library. Listening to people with compassion and empathy is very useful, but sometimes you have to try and move in a positive direction, not just away from a negative direction. It's not always easy. A lot of times we want to make our patrons happy when they say, I don't want this. And you try to say, well, how about this instead? But figuring out under COVID how to do that, very tricky. So one of the things I enjoyed seeing was, making phone calls, right? Just like Jane was saying, we have similar situations where we would call our patrons, and it wasn't always our older patrons, although in many cases they appreciated that. But one of the things we saw many of our smaller libraries doing is contacting what we called our high flyers, the people who were frequent users of the library, who checked out the most books, to make sure they still knew how to access our digital options, how to do it. Let's talk you through setting it up. We made a lot of handouts with circles and arrows that we could mail to people that would help them get a overdrive book on their phone, or sign up to do online databases so they could still read consumer reports, or so they could still read the newspaper. And sometimes that's literally a telephone call. And it's interesting because I did talk about this on social media, and on social media there was an awful lot of like, I can't believe you cold called people, that would make me so angry, etc. And figuring out ways to do that are respectful, as Jane said, that have an opt-out, was really sort of an integral part of being able to do that, and also being the hub to other resources, local food distribution, local where can you get a free mask, local how do you get your kids' computer fixed if they need it for school, et cetera, et cetera. The library became the hub for that. There were many sort of technological solutions. Many bad web pages were made under COVID that were nominally supposed to help people with this. But talking to Lynn or Amy or Courtney or Kate on the phone often helped a lot of people who might not have felt comfortable interacting with different technology than what they already knew. So looking at a couple actual physical examples from different public libraries in the US, Ferguson Public Library in Missouri was famous several years ago, for offering a safe haven during riots and police crackdowns in their community. And Scotty Bonner is their director. There's links to this on my list of links. Basically said, how much can we move outside? People can't come out inside, how much can we move outside? And so they did kind of the normal thing. Well, let's put tables out there. Let's put, let's let people check out books outside. But they also just shifted what they did. They just had carts with free books, because sometimes you just want to walk outside and be able to grab something and go. They moved their copy machine outside, because one of the things they found was that people needed photocopies. And if you can't go inside whatever, Kinko's or whatever your copy shop is, you're in a jam. People needed printing, and I will talk about that kind of briefly. Denver Public Library moved their entire computer lab outside during the good weather and basically turned it into a volunteer I mean, this woman is a staff member, but they had volunteers kind of watching it because, again, not listening to what people don't want. Well, what if somebody takes it? Well, what if somebody walks away with it? Well, what if, and you can sort of, you know, it's the Wi-Fi problem, right? Well, what if somebody downloads something illegal using our library Wi-Fi? And you can sort of point to all the legal ways in which that's not going to be your problem, but people are uncomfortable and you need to listen to sort of people's emotions in addition to the sort of the words they're saying. So Denver Public Library, outside, you can still use a computer. We're washing them down. We're keeping an eye on people. And to be honest, being able to see people outside using computers is actually sometimes a good marketing strategy for telling people you have computers. It's a weird way to think about it, but often the people that aren't coming into the library see it as a building that has mysteries inside, right? You don't know what's going on. You don't know if somebody's going to be rude to you. You don't know if you're going to be safe. You don't know if there's going to be a good bathroom. But seeing people outside who either look like you or look like they're doing what you want, really sort of an interesting way of doing outreach in addition to just getting people the services that they needed. And so thinking about what we could share. You know, we've always shared books, we've always shared information resources, but what else is there? Many libraries started paying money for Zoom. Well, if you're paying money for Zoom, you get 24 hours of Zoom. Maybe you can let other people who don't have 24 hours of Zoom. I don't know if you guys saw this, but like American Thanksgiving is coming up and everybody's yelling at everybody to stay home. And Zoom did like a really kind of an interesting thing. And they're like, hey, on American Thanksgiving, Zoom is just free. You don't have to just get that 40 minutes and then you get kicked off. Everybody can Zoom for free, stay home, stay healthy, which I actually kind of appreciate it. But if you're the library and you've got 24 hours of Zoom rooms, why don't you let your community also sign up for it on a schedule? And then more people can share that resource that you're paying for because we are the steward of a community resource. And if that's a Zoom room, fine. One of the things that I've noticed being at the Vermont Humanities Council is our speakers that we have a First Wednesdays series. People do lectures at libraries. They're super cool. But now that they're on Zoom, they're incredibly popular because people can go from anywhere, right? It's not just the people who can drive to the library in the middle of the night. It's people anywhere in the state. It's people outside of the geographic borders, which becomes a weird issue, right? Because our funding is super local. What does that mean if we are providing content to people outside of our region? But we're thinking about story times with permission. Talking about copyright has been a really interesting part of this. We've been pleasantly surprised at a lot of publishers and how much they were willing within reason to allow us to do things, and maybe giving some stuff away. We have a big box outside my public library that's just full of books to give away right now because it's really more important that you have something to read if you don't feel comfortable coming in the building or you don't have $2, that the library make $2 off of you during a pandemic. So couple other examples of that. Elmhurst Public Library, which is in Ohio, have a great, they have video reference, which I think a lot of libraries have done. They've got these chat windows that look like they're from, 1999, but who cares, right? You can talk to the kids help people and you know that you can because the graphics are simple, small, easy, accessible. If you can get to the website, you can talk to a person. If you can get to the website, you can chat with a librarian. Figuring out how to get people to the website becomes a challenge, but it is a thing that you can talk somebody through. The weird thing for me about being a computer librarian during this time is it's not just giving someone advice and then sending them off on their way. You're really not done until you've gotten the person to do the thing, right? It's not explaining Zoom, it's making sure you can actually help them use it. And of course, because animals are the center of our world right now, Elmhurst Public Library also has a very low-tech write a letter to our therapy dogs program. where Tori, Rainey, Princess, and Lucas are standing by to receive your letters. And oh my gosh, they will send you an email in response with a picture of them. I can't, like, it's so low key and yet it's so warm. It's so friendly. It touches you in your heart in a way that, man, more things really need to, right? So even my tiny library, and this is a picture of my tiny library, is found that a new weird popular thing with curbside printing. And I know this just seems kind of obvious, but for a lot of people, going to get a print from the library meant you go to the library, you've got to reserve a computer, you got to sit in the corner where somebody's looking over your shoulder, you got to figure out the printing thing, which, to be honest, in our library is not the greatest. You have to send it to a print queue. The librarian's got to push like 28 buttons, and then you get your print, and it costs 15 cents. You never have 15 cents. It's just a complete suboptimal user experience is the most polite way I can put it. But curbside, man, I do it all the time now. Color prints, pick it up, there's a box, you throw change into it. You can throw extra change into it. You can take change out of it. We've decided that the nickels don't matter as much as you being able to do the thing. And curbside printing in my library, which is not the most flexible library in the world, has been one of those great things where people in the community really feel served. They really feel accommodated, and it helps them solve a problem. Me personally, actually, I'm a justice of the peace, and I've been able to notarize documents over Zoom, and just being able to tell people, hey, you can do this, we can help you, you can stay safe, has been a really big deal. So wrapping up, one of the things that's really the most interesting to me about the digital divide is that it's not, can you click, can you point, can you, use a menu, as much as it's, can you try a new thing? Can you see how it's going to go? Do you have enough confidence to be able to go to a place you haven't gone and try a thing and see how it goes and troubleshoot it if it doesn't work? So we found that for libraries, obviously, the more technologically able you are, in some ways, it's going to be easier for you. But the digital readiness, and there's a link in my list of links to sort of Pew Research talking about what this means, it meant being able to take a problem, to see if there's a technology or technological application you can apply to that problem when appropriate. Don't get me wrong, there's ways to mess this up by, having beep boop robots do the work that humans should be doing, but then having the confidence that you can find solutions and find ways to make it work for you. And so digital readiness of not just our community being willing to try things, but our staff being willing to sort of go there and experiment and figure out what works and stop worrying about the nickels, was sort of the biggest part of making at least some of this work for us. So feel free to ask questions. This was me working my local election where I won Justice of the Peace re-election for yet another year. But I'm Jessamyn at Twitter, and I'm jessamyn@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to continue the conversation here or there. Thanks for your time. And I think Damian is going to wrap us up. Thank you, Damian.
Yeah, thank you, Jessamyn. Jade, Adele, and Jessamyn, that's some really great presentations there. I think that's we've got some great information. I've just taken about 8 pages of notes from the presentations. Kia ora koutou. Hi everyone. It is great to be here, and it is great to have 150 of us or so on the Zoom here. It is lovely to see so many familiar names actually for those participants. So hi to everyone. For me, just to remind people that the questions that we've got in the Slido, if you can just have a look, we'll work through some of those questions in a minute. But if you want to give a thumbs up to some of those questions, because we won't have time to go through them all but if there is some there that you'd like to, that you think are more important than others, give it a thumbs up so we can, we'll go through those. So please go to that, where the questions are, and look at that. So looking at the information that we've just, that's just been shared, we've just had 3 very passionate presenters talk about some, you know, some things which are, that they, it's their passion, what they bring to the job. I think how they talk about the services that they provide, that to me is what I picked up, which was just fantastic. For me, I'll just work through a quick summary of some of the key points. Then we'll go to the questions. So I'm just giving people a chance to give a thumbs up to those particular questions. But from Jane, library's response to a difficult situation, really quick to adapt, moving that digital story time online with some copyright assistance there from Alia, with the 3 story times a day, which sounds great. Busy, loaning digital devices out before lockdown, and getting staff so they couldn't actually get into the buildings. The focus was on kids, children, families and seniors, and I think that's you seem to really have a particular focus around that. You mentioned the digital divide was very evident. Click and collect services, curbside delivery, all your staff having to work from home. The 15-minute practice reading sessions, useful. You also mentioned the amount of clubs that you've got, and the pushing of those clubs, the promotion of those in different or particular areas related on the collections that you've actually got, using some of the resources that you have, like Canopy, that kind of thing. With the Stay Home Film Festival, you had different types of boxes there, family fun box, care boxes to the different customs too. 75,000 holds over a 3-month period. That sounds like some very busy times. Curating, and I think the theme of this digital curation for me was quite a theme out of Jane's presentation. Seniors, and we've seen that with Jessamyn as well, contacting seniors, providing an option to so they can opt out if they like, but 7,000 phone calls being made, having a book valet service, and continuing now that we're kind of out of some of the trickier parts, hopefully, continuing to stream. The challenge there for the library service is that building that community or rebuilding community confidence. A big focus on wellness factors being key for the library service. And some new library openings and big announcements coming up soon for there. So I thought Jane's presentation was excellent, as it always is with Jane, I'm going to say. Adele, I think what I took from Adele was the value of additional skills. So librarians have a certain skill base, but there's a whole range of other people that you can rely on that can actually provide a whole range of other skills like marketing and comms to help you actually do what you need to do to communicate out to the audience that you've got. I thought that was certainly some really interesting things mentioned, I think, by Adele. The PD support gap, having 500 people sign up to a newsletter really quickly. Some of the challenge around the NAC with the safe progressive space for youth literature professionals to get involved, to really focus on the communities they serve. I thought that was great. One of the challenging comments I thought Adele mentioned was, she mentioned monocultural and the challenge, I think, for library staff around what that means for us. And I think that to me is something that we need to unpack, I think, a lot more for our profession. Quite a challenge there. Analytics, the importance of analytics, which showed 8 PM on a Friday night, incredibly busy times. And for me also, I think the challenge here for Adele, the educational role and how that is built, the skills of the people involved to actually do that further. Building learning community through Yammer. Libraries and librarians need a bit of work on communication and marketing. That was what I wrote down as a piece there. Learn from public libraries. So take the library to your customers. Adele provided the Auckland example. Collaboration with marketing teams and style over substance and not being so dry. What are the library skills that you actually need? And we actually just need to be warm and approachable, which I thought was a lovely message. Jessamyn, I thought provided an amazing insight from America, which I think is all fascinating for a lot of us. Really, there Jessamyn's slides. A third of the community really cranky at denial of service. This digital divide being critical for them. Moving services to Facebook and other social media there, very useful. The ability to think outside the square and actually put money towards the shovel guy. Sometimes it is thinking outside of the box to actually get some of these things sorted. The use of grants to help Wi-Fi, contactless payments and other pieces like that. Again, focusing on librarians because they do know their community, the access to technology required and other things like that, where that personal communication is the key. And I think we've seen that throughout these, the three presentations there. Jessamyn mentioned Ferguson Public Library, the Denver Public Library, Safe Haven, moving technology outside, making it visible, which just makes a difference. The challenges of what we can share, the growth of Zoom and actually how that's bringing people together, keeping people safe, and a range of other technologies like that. The challenge of how do you push people to the website, if that's your mechanism to get to your customers, what's the best way to do that? And I think like all of us, we're all going to start writing to the dogs. That to me was what a beautiful service. I think that's just amazing. So we'll go to the questions. Now, some of these are actually for some people, but we might get. I'll ask some responses from all three. So there is quite a few questions there. So if I can get Jane, Adele, and Jessamyn just to give me some quick responses to these questions, if that's okay. So the question with the most thumbs up is how can we support those with low digital literacy and skills? Jane, can I go to you first?
Well, sort of one of the key things that we did was the tech help. So I think that libraries are always about giving that tech help. I think in COVID-19 times, we have to work out how to do that. For in-person tech help when they come into the library, we're now doing that through TechView. So, sort of keeping staff safe because that's important too. So, sort of with the physical distancing that's required, we can still deliver that tech help through technology. The telephone calls, sort of, and helping people feel confident to ask the question so that we can talk them through it is really important. We're about to launch a digital mentoring project where we'll have volunteer digital mentors, where we'll train them up. All Victorian library staff have also done some training around e-health. So because, sort of not only is the digital divide just affecting people in their learning, in their everyday life, but if all government forms and all e-health forms move to technical forms and move to technology, then we're going to have to skill people up to do that. And Australia's just, sort of published the 2020 Australian Digital Inclusion Index. So libraries can know very locally through their postcard codes, sort of what that digital divide is locally and be able to respond appropriately locally. Because, sort of, I think Jessamyn's right, that hyper local, it's not everything, sort of, one size fits all. So, you know, in our communities, we have 2 communities that would probably have about 28% who don't have internet to the home of those communities. So it's really important that we focused our efforts in those areas, as well as working out how to loan those internet enabled devices to the home. So I think they're the key things for us. That's my answer.
Thanks. Adele?
I think there's 2 different answers to that. In terms of our students, I feel like our co-curricular and learning and teaching teams have been working really, really hard to make things accessible. And that wasn't necessarily about the digital skills of the students, though I may be wrong. I felt it was more about making sure that our digital products had one point of entry or an easy point of entry, so they didn't have to look for how they got help. So what we learned really quickly was our chat use went through the roof throughout COVID. So our co-curricular team were able to do quick triage and then send them where they needed to go, as opposed to students having to work out where to go. And I think that's been really, really successful. In terms of the staff and digital skills, we did some debriefs early on about how it was going in COVID, and I talked about in our previous conversation, is that some people who had felt some reluctance to lean in or felt that they couldn't learn digital skills actually used the word force. And it was the most positive use of the word force I've ever heard, in like, oh, I was forced to learn this because of the situation. And it wasn't like blaming COVID. It was just like, because of this situation, I'm going to have to get over this fear or this thing I've been putting off, and just embrace the learning. And it's like it was really refreshing to hear, and people were really honest about it. Some people had avoided using Zoom until that point, which is probably smart, honestly. So, I mean, I think, and we haven't measured this, but my feeling is that our digital literacy across the staff has gone up at this point. We've started using Teams immediately. We're using Yammer better. We've been doing some like writing emails, running training sessions that, to sort of upskill a little bit as well. But our digital innovation team has been running micro lessons on different platforms and accessibility and things to get that skill set up as well. So we've all been working really closely together, and it has different outputs, but I think it's just lifting everything that's coming out of La Trobe really positively.
Thank you, Adele. Jessamyn?
Well, I'm the tech help person at my library, and we had to sort of shift a little bit from, hey, I'm here every week, you've got a question, come here every week, we'll just sit around and talk about computers. And so we did have a lot of people who were what I would call kind of not digitally ready, just because they were anxious, they were concerned, they wanted a person, like they had a computer, they could use a computer, but they were not confident in their own skills. And so one of the things COVID sort of forced us to do in some ways was kick people out of the nest a little bit, and not in a bad way, but just being like, you're going to have to do a little bit more of this yourself. It doesn't mean we're not going to be here with you, but I shifted what I did immediately from being in person to being like, look, I'm available over email, we can Zoom, we can chat. If you need to talk on the phone, I'm actually a terrible phone person. So I'm like, you need to talk to Lynn or Amy if you're on the phone, but you can talk to me. And I did a lot of like handout making, like screenshots, circles and arrows, emailing someone a PDF. I mean, we're not talking the people who had no computer or no tech literacy. In many cases, those people were gonna have different challenges that were maybe gonna need to be also addressed, like within the school system, which we also work closely with. But many handouts, linking people to like manuals online and stepping people through it. So in many cases, tech support and helping people with digital divide stuff became a lot more iterative. You'd send somebody a thing and be like, did that help you? Let me know. And from a staff perspective, we did a lot, especially early on, practice. You know, we had concerns about Zoom's privacy policies. And so we tried Jitsi, and we tried Microsoft Teams, and we tried, you know, Skype, etc. We tried other things, because I think the most important thing for us in, you know, small town America was meeting people where they were and encouraging them to maybe move a couple more steps, but not like being like, yeah, you use Skype, well, tough, we use Zoom, so figure it out. And just being like, okay, I'll meet you on Skype and we'll teach you on Skype how to use Zoom. And then I'll email you some handouts where you can curbside print them at the library. Because for a lot of people, having something tangible is what they associate with us, and figuring out ways to bring that into sort of the more virtual way we're interacting now was the big shift for us that I think was challenging, but ultimately worked in most cases. Like I have a landlady who's 97 who uses email and doesn't see super good, and you know, every now and again, she has a challenge that really does require sort of an in-person interaction. And so sometimes we'll do, you know, what you guys were saying, like finding a mentor so that there is a safe person who can talk to the other person, who can be their initial thing that we can then, as the library, work through. It's super tricky and it's definitely more work, but I also feel it's more gratifying because I feel like after this, we're going to have people who have slightly better toolkits and resilience in most, though not all cases. And that's going to benefit our whole community, not just the people we talk to directly.
Thank you, Jessamyn. I think we might, we'll keep going through the questions. Jane, I might get you to respond to this one. And how are you ensuring a smooth transition for users back to COVID normal, especially regarding loans now due, holds, and making people feel safe in the library?
So that is a real a big issue for us as people are starting to come out of lockdown. We're making sure that our users understand what to expect when they come into the library. We don't find, so, you know, sort of we're saying, you know, sort of, and we automatically renew your books for you. So we try and do everything to make it easy. But, you know, one of the key things is, you know, we've got a concierge at the main entrance now so that they can actually triage, you know, sort of what you need. We still do our click and collect. So, you know, sort of the quick, you know, sort of you can quickly pick up your holds and go because, of course, under the roadmap, we're only allowed 10 people in our spaces, regardless of how big they are. At a time. So, you know, sort of, so we're slowly working through that. One of the key aspects for all of us, though, is to make sure that staff feel confident. And so we've done quite a lot of, you know, sort of infection control, COVID-19 planning and training with all of our staff. So they're aware of what they can and can't do, because, you know, our staff want to help. As Jessamyn says, they want to help people face to face. They want to actually do it. But to keep people safe and to keep staff safe, we have to actually do things in a different way. So it's really about ensuring that our members know what to expect, know what they can do, and, you know, sort of feel confident that what we're doing is keeping them safe as well. We're finding that people are slow to come to back to the libraries in person. So they're quite okay at the click and collect, but, you know, sort of just a bit nervous. And of course, with Metro Melbourne being, you're now able to go regional. The first thing that all of Metro Melbourne did was they flew from Melbourne and went into those regional areas to visit family and friends. So that's what we're doing, but it's really about making sure that our customers know what to expect when they come in the library.
Thank you, Jane. Adele, I think this one might be one for you. Libraries should stop hiring marketing staff. They have no respect for library users' needs and won't listen to librarians. Any comments from you on that one?
Well, to be frank, that's a defensive statement. So it's no question. So I guess my feeling on that is, if you're already feeling that way, working with marketing is never going to go well. The thing is, librarians like to talk about what we do. And that's not necessarily interesting for everybody else. And sometimes we need to talk about the impact of what we do or what the benefit is for the other person. And that is something that you need to train staff to do. So, and it is hard for people. It's a process that I've had to go through. Just because it's valuable to me doesn't mean it's valuable to other person. So writing copy is a skill. It's a marketing skill. And I think actually all library staff should be trained in marketing skills, because that makes us better communicators, better advocates, And that's all positives for the value of library and your role, your employability, their transferable skills. So if one day you decide, you know what, I think I want to move into a different field, you've got that transferable skills. To think that we don't need those skills, I think, isn't thinking about a bigger picture. Different audiences have different marketing, like different messaging requirements. And whilst you might know lots of community members one-on-one, there is a skill set to that. There is an expertise to that. And if we want to respect people's librarian skills and their specialities, we have to respect marketing specialities. The problem is these two areas do not usually overlap. There's not usually degrees where you do both. And we have very different vocabularies and terminologies, and we are horrible with communicating with each other. So I think there's some work to be done there. I haven't seen anyone crack it, actually. I might be doing a big generalization statement. It's always a tension, but that means that's an opportunity, because what happens if we get that right? And do we need to be sending some librarians to go and do marketing training or marketing degrees to start bringing that gap closer together? Because I think a lot of our copy could get better. It can always get better. My copy always gets better going through Nicole and our quality and communications team. And you need those second pair of eyes, because you can be so familiar with your product that you don't see the attractiveness or the engagement of what you've written. And often we override it as well. Clarity is the big one. What is it? How many brands are we using? That's also a problem for libraries. Too many brands, you don't know what the entry point is. So we really do, just because I talked a bit about we're not our user proxy, we know too much about libraries to have that objective point of view of what's going on. And that's where testing is really, really important. And we can learn a lot from design thinking, user experience, and that's working probably with digital teams and marketing a bit more as well.
Thank you, Adele. I think we've got time for one more question, and the next one on the list, it is for Jane. How did your collection cope with COVID? Any gaps identified or any surprises in what has proved popular?
Well, I suppose there wasn't really any gaps per se, except that we didn't have enough. So we really invested in our digital library. So our digital downloads increased by 600%. So it wasn't, sort of just a little bit. And one of the key things that we had to do was to train staff in all of our e-library offer. So not every one of our staff knew what our e-library had in it. So, sort of we have quite a lot of English as a second language support, quite a lot of learning, the Canopy and Beamer film, sort of as well with the visual film downloads and documentaries and learning components on that as well. So we really skilled staff up, and then we really invested heavily into it. And we were able, with the support of our, sort of e-vendors, to actually have, we purchased multiple copies. So, it's unlimited downloads of those popular titles. So we really did see holds, sort of on the popular titles, obviously fiction. And we were able to invest more, sort of in those to make them so that you didn't have to wait until 2022 to get your copy. So that was a gap. I think the other key thing that we found was that, particularly in the family fun boxes, because we didn't require any books back, we said keep them home, we don't want them. In the family fun boxes, we really ran out of our juniors, sort of our junior fiction component, because that was what they were asking for in that very junior easy, the first readers, because schooling went to home as well. So they didn't have access to the school library. So those junior readers, sort of we did run out of those. So, sort of, but that was because they didn't come back. We don't have that issue now because we've got so much back. We're trying to get more of it out the door now.
Thank you, Jane. Look, we've just about come to the end of our time. There's enough questions there for another 3 hours, I think, of responses.
Happy to share the questions, and I can create blog posts and give the answers.
I'm sure that's something we can organise, Sarah, I think, if that's okay. Thank you so much, Jane, Adele and Jessamyn. Some absolutely fantastic presentations there. It's great to have international perspectives and such an engaging conversation there. I want to mention that as a small token of thanks to the speakers in this webinar, the CRIG Seminar Committee and Cowell have arranged planted by a community group through the organisation 15 Trees. So please let us know what you thought of this seminar by filling out the online survey, which will be sent to you shortly. And this will assist the CRIG Seminar Committee in improving future events and webinars. So please continue the conversation on Twitter after the session by using hashtag CRIG2020. Thank you everyone for your time today. Great to see so many of you join us. Have a great rest of the day. All the best. See you.